Today's story is about snail lady. Um, she is living with a man who has no wife. So she came out from water and helped him to make him have some uh, breakfast like meal. So let me start my first story. So, the snail lady. Once there was a young man who lived all alone in a small village. One day, while he was hoeing his garden, he murmured to himself, "Every day I hoe the fields and harvest crops. If only I have someone to share my meals with. Share your meals with me." It was a woman's voice. The man was very surprised. He looked all around, but he could see no one. After a while, he went back to hoeing his garden. "Every day I hoe the fields, but who do I have to share my meals with? I'm tired of eating alone." The young man kept on talking to himself. Then he heard the woman's voice again. "Share your meals with me," said the voice. This time he noticed that the voice came from somewhere close by. The man looked at the edge that separated the fields. All he saw was a small snail. He couldn't find the source of the voice. Without thinking much about it, he picked up the snail and put it in a big clay jar. When the man woke up the next morning, he found a delicious breakfast waiting for him. Who could have made such a wonderful meal? He exclaimed, with his eyes wide open with amazement. That evening another meal lay on the table, prepared for the young man. "This tastes really good. Tomorrow I'll have to hide and watch to see who is secretly making me these nice meals," the young man thought to himself. The next day he pretended that he was going out to work in the garden. Instead, he noisily walked out of the yard, then quietly tiptoed back and hid near the kitchen. Peeking into the kitchen, he saw something that at first he couldn't believe. A beautiful woman stepped out of the same clay jar that he had put the snail the day before. She cleaned his house, washed his clothes, and even mended some of his old clothing. When evening came, the young woman prepared his dinner. Then she turned into a snail and slowly crawled back into the jar. As the man stared in amazement, he thought to himself, "How I wish that beautiful lady were my wife." The next morning, the man woke up early and sat by the jar. Before long, the snail lady crawled out. The man grabbed her hands tightly and said, "Would you please be my wife?" The lady blushed. Then she nodded, and the young man and the snail lady lived happily together as husband and wife for many years. One day the king went hunting near the village where the happy couple lived. Then the king rode his horse past their humble little house. He saw the beautiful snail lady standing outside. "What a beauty!" he exclaimed. "How come she's married to some farmer? I should make her my wife." The king was very cruelly and unjust king. He called the young man. "I challenge you to a contest. Tomorrow we see who can cut down the tree faster. If you win, we'll give you half of my kingdom. But if you lose, you must give me your wife." When the young man heard this, his face turned white. The snail lady fastened a knot to her wedding ring and gave it to her husband. The knot said, "If you throw this ring into the ocean, my father, the Dragon King, will help you." So the young man tossed the ring into the ocean. Amazingly, the sea split apart as the ring hit the water. Right at that spot, a path appeared, and it led down into the sea. At the end of the road stood the Dragon King's majestic castle. The young man went inside. It was not long before the Dragon King appeared. Without saying a single word, the Dragon King, who was now his father-in-law, gave him a rod. At first he didn't know exactly what the rod was for, so he just took it home and waited. When the day of the contest arrived, the king chose 2 trees for the contest, and he was cruel and unjust king. He chose a smaller one for himself and a larger one for the young man. Then the king ordered 200 of his finest soldiers to start cutting down the tree. He had an evil smirk on his face. The dispirited young man did not know what to do, but holding his breath and praying hard, he cracked the roll down. Out came countless little men, with always little axes in their little hands. Quickly they marched into action. Together the little lumberjacks took their axes and started chopping away the big tree with swift little chops. In hardly any time at all the little men had felled the young man's tree. The king's soldiers had gotten into each other's way so much that they didn't even get halfway through a little tree that the cruel king had chosen for himself. But the king didn't keep his promise. Instead of giving a young man half of his kingdom, he thought of another way to try and win the snail lady. "We must have another contest tomorrow. This time we will race our horses, and the first one to cross the river wins." Again the Dragon King said nothing when the young man came to the Dragon Palace in search of help. All he did was give his son-in-law a skinny, tired-looking colt. The king mounted his tall, strong, legal-looking horse. Nearby, the young man climbed the tired, weak-looking horse that his father-in-law had given him. Just before the young man was fully saddled, the king started off across the river. Somehow the young man's horse ran as fast as lightning and was on the other side before anyone realized it had won. The king got so angry trying to catch up that he fell into the water. Of course, the king did not keep his promise this time either. "This time you'll race both," he said, eager for another chance. The young man got a little rowboat from a Dragon King and floated his way into the ocean. The king sailed out in his shiny, sparkling new ship. The young man's little boat shot ahead of the bulky royal ship so fast that even the king thought it was a dolphin. The king turned red and stamped his feet. He tried to think of another way to justify taking a beautiful snail lady away with him. He might have thought of something if a big wave didn't come up and swallow his ship. Having beaten the king once and for all, The young man took the entire kingdom for himself. But he took the food and rices that the mean king had hoarded throughout his reign and gave them to the poor. All he wanted was to live with his wife happily ever after. The end.